Hi everyone, welcome back. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Vincent, and this is a story I never thought I'd be telling. I didn't just lose a marriage. I lost the version of myself that believed love could withstand anything. But before I get ahead of myself, let me take you to the beginning. I met Katie years ago at a startup summit. It was one of those networking events where entrepreneurs and professionals come together to exchange ideas, make connections, and, hopefully, open doors to new opportunities. I wasn't even planning to go that day. I had a ton of work to do, and honestly, I wasn't the type to enjoy standing around in a crowded hall making small talk. But something told me to show up, and that decision set everything in motion. Katie and I crossed paths during a discussion on business scalability. She was ambitious, full of energy, and had this confidence about her I love. She was trying to get her business off the ground, but she had gaps in her strategy. Gaps I immediately saw. We struck up a conversation, and it turned into a deep dive into business models, funding strategies, and the challenges of building something from the ground up. She asked smart questions, and I had the answers. At that moment, it was nothing but two professionals exchanging knowledge. By the end of the summit, we had exchanged contacts. She wanted to stay in touch, to pick my brain whenever she needed guidance. I didn't think much of it at the time. To me, it was just another professional connection. But looking back, that was the first step toward everything that would come later. At first, our conversations were strictly about business. She would call to ask for advice, how to structure her pricing, how to attract investors, how to handle difficult clients. I always had insights to share, and she always seemed grateful. It felt good to help someone who was so driven, someone who genuinely wanted to succeed. Over time, those business calls became more frequent. They stretched beyond work-related topics. We started talking about life, ambitions, setbacks. We began meeting for coffee, then lunch, then long evening talks that had nothing to do with business plans or market trends. I got to know Katie beyond her professional persona. She had this playful side and a sense of humor that could catch me off guard. Before I even realized it, those casual meetups became the part of my day I looked forward to the most. One afternoon over coffee, she brought up the idea of me joining her company. At first, I hesitated. I was doing fine on my own, consulting here and there, but Katie made a strong case. She wanted someone she could trust in her company, someone who understood the vision as much as she did. She promised me a solid salary, good benefits, and most importantly, a real stake in helping build something meaningful. It wasn't an easy decision. I knew mixing business and personal relationships could get complicated, but in the end, I agreed. The first 2 months at her company were intense. I worked hard, proving my worth not just as Katie's trusted advisor, but as someone who could actually make things happen. I stayed in the background, letting her take the spotlight as the face of the company, while I focused on refining operations, fixing problems, and making sure everything ran smoothly. It wasn't long before we both realized that our connection wasn't just about business anymore. Late nights at the office turned into lingering glances, and before we knew it, we weren't just colleagues. We were a couple. Less than a year after I joined the company, we got married. It felt like the perfect merger, in both business and life. We were a power couple. She led from the front while I made decisions from the shadows. I didn't mind that she was the CEO, the one everyone saw and admired. My role was different, but just as crucial. And for the first 5 years, it worked. The company thrived. Our marriage felt unshakable. We were building something great together, both in the office and at home. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I remember the day we hired Fred. To me then, he was just another name on the payroll, and, at first, I didn't think much of him. He had a way of talking himself out of situations, making excuses sound like valid reasons, and somehow managing to look busy while doing absolutely nothing. At first, I figured he wouldn't last long. In a company like ours, results mattered, and people like Fred usually weeded themselves out when they couldn't keep up. But I was wrong. Instead of being held accountable, Fred thrived, not because he was good at his job, but because my wife, Katie, made sure he never faced the consequences of his incompetence. At first, I tried to ignore it. Everyone deserves a learning curve, right? But the pattern became impossible to overlook. Fred would miss deadlines, mess up reports, and show up late, yet Katie would cover for him every time. If someone in the team pointed out his mistakes, she'd downplay them, shift the blame, or act like it wasn't a big deal. The same woman who once prided herself on running a tight ship was suddenly letting things slide, but only when it came to Fred. It didn't sit right with me. It wasn't just about work. I started noticing how often they were together. Their lunch breaks stretched into hours, and my wife insists Fred drives her. Private meetings that had no clear purpose in her office. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The whispers started making their way around the office. Little comments from coworkers, exchanged in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. I wasn't the kind of guy who jumped to conclusions. I wanted to believe in my wife. But the pieces were starting to add up, and I couldn't ignore the picture they were forming. So, one night, after we got home, I decided to ask her just a simple question about it. What's the deal with Fred? The reaction I got told me everything I needed to know. Instead of answering me, Katie went straight into defense mode. Her face hardened. Her voice sharpened. Oh, so now you're jealous? She shot back like I had accused her of something outrageous. I hadn't even mentioned the rumors yet. I was just asking about his work ethic, about why she kept covering for him. But somehow, in less than a minute, she had flipped the conversation, making me the bad guy for even bringing it up. From that moment on, it became impossible to talk to her about Fred. Anytime I mentioned his name, she'd roll her eyes, sigh, or outright ignore me. If I pressed the issue, she'd accuse me of being paranoid, insecure, or trying to control her decisions. It was like a switch had flipped in her. The woman who used to value my opinions, who once asked for my advice on almost everything, suddenly acted like my concerns weren't worth her time. That was the moment I realized that somewhere along the line, my wife had stopped respecting me, and I didn't know how to fix it. Things became harder to ignore as the so-called business trips came into the picture. At first, they seemed normal. Katie was the CEO, after all, and travel was sometimes necessary. But I knew our industry inside and out. Most of the deals she claimed she needed to handle in person could have easily been done over the phone or through email. In fact, that's how we'd handled them before. Yet all of a sudden, she was packing her bags every other week, claiming she needed to be on the ground for meetings that didn't require her presence. That alone was strange, but what made it worse? She was always taking Fred with her. There was no logical reason for him to be the one traveling with her instead of me, her husband, and one of the company's key players. But every time I brought it up, she had a convenient excuse. Oh, Fred helps me as an assistant. You want to replace him? I was speechless with these excuses. It seems like she was using every opportunity she gets to spend time with Fred. The more these trips happened, the more uneasy I felt. The timing was always suspect. Sometimes she'd announce a trip at the last minute, giving me no time to ask questions. Other times, she'd leave on a Thursday and stretch the trip into the weekend. Business trips that mysteriously included extra downtime. It wasn't just my own suspicions either. I started noticing the way our employees whispered. People weren't just talking about it behind my back. They were pitying me. One night, after another one of these ridiculous trips, I decided enough was enough. We had just gotten home from work, and she was doing what she always did, acting like nothing was wrong. So I called her to join me in the living room. She sighed like I was inconveniencing her, but she sat down. I didn't beat around the bush. Rumors are going around about you and Fred. She didn't hesitate. She just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "What do you want me to do about mere rumors?" Then she stood up and walked away, just like that. No explanation or effort to clear things up. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong and my marriage was going downhill. One Monday morning, I had no idea it would be the day my marriage completely unraveled. The board meeting had just wrapped up a routine discussion about our company's next quarter, projections, and operational challenges. I was still in work mode, focused on strategy. As the meeting ended, Katie stood up, gathering her files, and I saw an opportunity to speak privately with her about some of the issues raised in the meeting as we stepped out of the conference room. We entered her office, and she moved around, setting her things down on the desk. Just as I was about to bring up the client strategy, she abruptly said, "Give me a second, I need to use the restroom." Without another word, she walked out, leaving her phone and files on the table. Almost immediately, as she left, her screen lit up, and a notification popped up. My eyes moved to it instinctively, and what I saw left me shocked. It was a message from Fred. "Damn, you look hot in that gown today. I'd love to give you back shots with you still wearing it." For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My wife was sleeping with this man. The same man she accused me of being jealous, the same man she had chosen over me. At work, in our marriage, and now in bed. I felt instant rage, but something inside me held me back from reacting. Maybe it was just the cold realization that nothing she said would change what I had just seen. The proof was in front of me. It was undeniable. With shaky hands, I pulled out my own phone and took a picture of the message. I knew if I confronted her without it, she'd twist the narrative, gaslight me, tell me I was seeing things, that it was a joke, that I was insecure. I wasn't about to give her that chance. I slid my phone back into my pocket, turned, and walked out of her office. I didn't wait for her to return. I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I had to look her in the eye at that moment. That afternoon, I was already on edge, but I held it in. I went about my work as if nothing had changed. I buried myself in my tasks, trying to keep my mind busy. Then I got a message that one of our clients had raised concerns about delays, and as the operations lead, I knew exactly where the bottleneck was. The issue was Fred. He had missed deadlines, failed to communicate, and made errors that cost us time and money. So, I did my job. I pointed it out professionally, directly. But before Fred could even speak for himself, Katie cut in. She didn't just defend him. She attacked me. The room went silent. I looked around, seeing the way my colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one dared to challenge the CEO, especially when she was defending her favorite. Fred leaned back in his chair. He didn't even have to fight his own battles anymore. Katie was doing it for him. My wife was choosing another man over me, publicly, without hesitation. I could have argued, but what was the point? I took a slow breath, then nodded. "Noted," I said, keeping my voice steady. Then I stood up and headed straight to my office. I didn't hesitate. I sat down, opened my laptop, and typed out my resignation letter, including the following. "I am resigning from my position, effective immediately. I am ending our marriage. I know about your infidelity." I printed the letter, signed it, and walked directly to Katie's office. She was sitting at her desk. I placed the letter in front of her. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from boredom to confusion. She looked up at me, opening her mouth to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned around and walked out. I didn't need to see her reaction. I didn't need her to explain. That night, Katie came home to meet me sitting in the living room. She walked in, dropped her bag by the door, and sighed like she had just finished a long, exhausting day. She glanced at me, trying to gauge my mood, then sat across from me on the couch. "Vincent," she started, her voice calm but careful. "I think we need to talk." I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, waiting. She took that as her cue to begin damage control. She went straight to denial. "I don't know what's gotten into you, but this thing about me and Fred, it's ridiculous. It's just office gossip, and you're throwing everything away over rumors." Her tone was firm, like she was trying to convince both me and herself at the same time. She leaned forward, dropping her voice like she was offering me a way out. "You don't have to resign. We can fix this. Just stop listening to nonsense." I let her talk. I let her sit there and spin her story, acting like I was the one making a mistake. And then, when she was done, I pulled out my phone, opened my gallery, and turned the screen toward her. The screenshot of Fred's message was right there. I asked her if she received the back shots. Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. It was over, and she knew it. She blinked a few times, probably trying to come up with some kind of excuse. But there was nothing she could say. The proof was right there, and I wasn't interested in any more of her lies. After a long, tense silence, she finally exhaled, defeated. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice quieter now. And, just like that, the conversation flipped. She wasn't trying to convince me to stay anymore. She was trying to cut her losses. I told her exactly what I wanted. A clean break. No court battles. No drawn-out negotiations. I wanted my share of a company. Half, to be exact. I had spent years helping build that business. I wasn't going to walk away empty-handed. She hesitated for a moment, probably considering her options. But she knew she didn't have many. A public scandal would ruin her, and she cared too much about her reputation to let that happen. So she agreed. I walked away with half of the company and a few extra benefits that made sure I wouldn't be starting from scratch. And the first thing I did with my newfound power? I fired Fred. A simple termination notice was enough to end his time in the company. But I didn't stop there. See, in our industry, connections matter, and I had plenty of them. I made a few calls, sent a few emails, and within days, Fred was blacklisted. Nobody wanted to hire him. His little ride on Katie's favoritism train had come to a dead stop. Katie and I never spoke much after that. We finalized the paperwork, signed the agreements, and that was it. She still ran her half of the business, and I operate from afar as an owner. But one thing was clear. She wasn't the one in control anymore. I was. Now, even with all this, I couldn't shake one question. Was it a mistake to work for my wife? Looking back, I can see how blind I was. When she first asked me to join her company, I took it as a sign of love and trust. I thought we were building something together, a partnership in every sense, marriage and business, side by side. But what I didn't understand back then was that there's a fine line between working with someone and working for someone, especially when that someone is your spouse. Power changes people. The moment one person holds authority over the other, the dynamic shifts, and I was too in love to see it happening. I let my feelings cloud my judgment. I ignored the warning signs. And before I knew it, I had become an employee first, a husband second, and, eventually, just an afterthought. Then there's another question I can't ignore. Did I let love blind me to the dangers of power imbalance? The truth is, I never expected Katie to cheat, but maybe I should have expected something to go wrong. I assumed that because I was loyal, she would be too. I assumed that because I worked hard, I would be valued. But in reality, the moment she saw herself as the one in control, my worth to her started to shrink. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was just another piece of her business, something she could replace or push aside when she felt like it. Love wasn't enough to protect me from that shift. And then comes the real question, the one that lingers in my mind more than I'd like to admit. Did I go too easy on her? I walked away with half the company. I fired Fred. I made sure he'd never work in this industry again. But was that enough? There were moments when I thought about taking more, about making sure Katie felt the same level of humiliation and betrayal that I did. Maybe I should have taken everything. Maybe I should have dragged her name through the mud. But that's just my perspective. Maybe I'm right. Maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Should I have taken more? Should I have fought harder? Or did I handle it the right way? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And with that, I'll wrap this up. Thanks for watching. Until next time.